and it overloaded. Hello Internet, welcome to my shop. I've got a bit of a project going on here that's caused by my own fault. I was running a setup in the machine. It was a job I'd done several times, but I was trying out a new tool. I swapped out, put the new tool in, touched it off, measured it, forgot to record it. Ran the part, because it was a part I'd ran several times, and just being a little absent-minded, I went ahead and turned up the rapids and let it go. When it swapped to that tool, it came in and rapid straight down into the vise. Pretty nasty crash. I'll pull you in here so you can take a look at what it did to the vise. It's actually been a couple of weeks now. I haven't actually run the machine very much, and I've stoned this off and kind of cleaned it up a little bit with the wire wheel so that it's not as bad as it was whenever it first hit, but it hit pretty hard and took a pretty good gash out. All that being the history of what happened here, the fallout from that. The next job that I ran, I was swapping out a tool and I realized that the tool was really warm and not too hot to touch, but it was warm, and I'd never seen that before on this machine. This area here would get really, really warm. Warm enough where it's uncomfortable to, grab onto it and hold onto it. Not so hot that, it'd burn or anything, or not even enough to smoke the oil on it or anything like that, but hot enough where, it was uncomfortable to touch, like really hot dishwater type temperature. Obviously that means it's putting extra load on those bearings and it's going to wear them out. So I haven't been running the machine at all for the last couple of weeks. Other than last weekend I turned it on to double check, ran the spindle to see about how long, and it warms up within about 2 or 3 minutes of the spindle running. So what I'm planning on doing is I'm going to go ahead and pull this spindle out, and we'll take a look at it, see how to go about possibly redoing the preload on the bearings, and just kind of giving it a general once over and seeing what is the process for doing this. This older system, there's no documentation on it. I don't really have any 100% feel for what's going to be required, and hopefully I can find some people that actually know a little bit about spindles and spindle rebuilds and can at least give me some guidelines on what I should be doing. Let's go ahead and get at it. I'll bring you in and show you what all's going to be involved. Getting it out looks like it's actually going to be relatively easy, so let's go take a look at it. Well, it's been a few days, and I was able to get it back where the ball screw will drive the spindle up and down. I didn't videotape it. I was much more nervous about making sure that I was not breaking anything. So trying to focus on the camera and getting shots and everything was kind of the furthest from my mind. There was quite a few hairy moments. I'll kind of reenact a few of what I went through to get things back into place. But right now, the basic things that I've found is that the spindle housing, which fits into a bore in the casting here, is extremely tight. Seems at all times, so even just the Z-axis driving it up and down, it's actually fairly snug. Seems to require quite a bit of force to move it. Once it gets all the way down, my current thought is that there's just enough of a 40 years of dry varnished oil stuck to the top of this where it doesn't normally go into the casting. That is what's causing it to stick. So I'm going to clean that up and we give that a try and see if that changes anything. I've got it back where I could put everything back together and I'd be back with the same problem I had before, where the bottom spindle bearing gets warmer than I'd like. I wouldn't even call it hot, but warm enough where you put your hand on it and it's uncomfortable to hold it there. So I would like to actually get that fixed. That's the end goal here, but I want to make sure that I don't screw up everything else trying to fix that. I'm going to go ahead and bring the camera in and kind of just go over a little bit of the Z-axis and the way this head works. It's fairly interesting. It's quite a bit different than any other modern mill. A little more reminiscent of a Bridgeport quill, but only slightly there. There's no pinion or anything that actually drives it. It does have a ball screw here. But here, I'll bring you in and give you a look. Alright, so this is the top of the head. So this is the quill housing, the Z-axis screw. These are the oiler connectors. There's one oiler that goes into the spindle to oil the bearing. There's a couple of switches. I went ahead and threw some labels on them. Guy that sits on here normally, and it hits that switch, and that tells the machine that the Z-axis is all the way in 0, and that releases the tool changer to function. This guy here is a spindle cutout, but it's actually what stops the spindle from spinning when it comes up into the tool changer, so that it's not spinning a tool. Up here, this is the gearbox that maintains the limit switches for the Z-axis going up and down. It makes sure it doesn't continue going. It does have a few little gearing in here that give you thousandth scale on the Z-axis height. So from here, I can actuate the Z up and down. As you can see, the spindle comes down to the bottom. This is where the normal operation is, and this whole thing slides up and down inside the casting here. And I can see it's got a slight brown tinge to it, so I'm pretty sure it does have a lot of varnished oil on it. So I'm going to get that cleaned up and see if it makes any difference. Full rapid back to Z0. And it overloaded. So this is where I find there's a little bit of an issue, especially with the very top portion of this, that I think is actually where it gets a little bound up, and likely because of that varnished oil. But that very bit right there, going at full rapid, trying to pull it through that area, overloads the servo motor. I think just cleaning that up in general is actually going to be very helpful. I had noticed that deep pecking drilling cycles, where the Z is, rapiding up and down and going down a little bit further each time, and every once in a while I get an overload. So basically I stopped using that because of those kind of issues. So that kind of shows how tight that fit is inside here. Let's look at some of the other items that I had done, and I'll have to actually reset in order to clear that overload off of the servo motor. So what I ended up doing to try to push the spindle out was, detaching this from the spindle, moving it up, and then just using a block of wood in here, and then using the ball screws to actually push it through. And that got it most of the way, but I did notice it was starting to get really tight at the end, and that's when I stopped. And I was like, well, maybe I better not do it that way. So I got on and tried to pry it and find out what was going on, and it felt like it hit bottom. It was not going to budge, but then it also didn't want to go back up either. The way I ended up getting it to go back up was a little scary in its own right. I used a couple of blocks of wood underneath here and the course adjustment of the head pushing against that in order to actually get it to go back up. And doing that, use the entire weight of the entire head to push that back up, which wasn't enough. It was actually putting pressure on the Acme screw that lifts the head up and down. There you can see where that motor is that drives the main course head up and down. So that's kind of an overview of where I'm at. I've got everything kind of taken apart. I've made sure to go through and document and double check that I know exactly where all of my hardware is and screws, because one of the worst things about taking something apart like this and not putting it back together right away is that you start to forget where everything goes. So took some notes to make sure that I know, exactly where everything is and where it goes. But I think it's going to be like this at least for the week, and maybe a little bit over the week, but not until next weekend. I'll actually try acetone on the spindle and see if I can get that cleaned up. All right, until next time, that's where I'm at.